My sister Sarah laughed so hard at my custodial uniform that she nearly choked on her wine. The entire restaurant turned to look as she wiped tears from her eyes, pointing at my work shirt like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. "You're 32 years old, Jake, and you're still pushing a mop around an office building," she gasped between fits of laughter. "When are you going to get a real job like normal people? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." Her colleagues from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions nodded in agreement, their designer suits and expensive watches catching the light as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I just smiled, adjusted my simple polo shirt, and said nothing. They had no idea that the office building I cleaned was actually my own 30-story headquarters, and that tomorrow morning, Sarah's company would officially become my newest acquisition. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one holding all the cards. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as I pushed the industrial cart down the marble hallway of the Meridian Tower. It was 6:47 a.m., and the building buzzed with the quiet energy of early morning preparations. Security guards nodded respectfully as I passed. Elevator operators held doors without being asked, and the few executives who arrived this early offered genuine smiles and morning greetings. To anyone watching, I was Jake Sullivan, head of building maintenance for one of downtown Portland's most prestigious office complexes. I wore the same navy polo shirt with Sullivan Facility Services embroidered on the chest, carried the same worn leather tool belt my grandfather had passed down to me, and maintained the same methodical routine I'd followed for 8 years. What they didn't see was the wireless earpiece tucked discreetly behind my ear, connecting me to conference calls with investors in Tokyo and London. They didn't notice the high-end smartphone I kept in my cargo pocket, constantly buzzing with notifications about stock prices, acquisition updates, and strategic decisions that affected thousands of employees across 12 states. I had perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. The Meridian Tower housed 43 different companies across its 30 floors. From tech startups on the lower levels to established investment firms claiming the prestigious upper floors, it represented a cross-section of American business ambition. I knew every tenant, every lease agreement, every square foot of rentable space, because I owned the building. I owned the entire block, actually, along with 16 other commercial properties throughout the Pacific Northwest. But Sarah didn't know that. Neither did my parents, my extended family, or anyone else in my personal life. To them, Jake Sullivan was the disappointing youngest son who had never quite figured out how to apply his intelligence to anything meaningful. The family member who showed up to holiday dinners in work clothes, who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck, who lived in a modest apartment above a hardware store on the wrong side of town. It hadn't always been this way. Growing up in the working-class neighborhood of Southeast Portland, I had been the curious kid who took apart electronics to understand how they worked, who built elaborate tree houses with engineering precision, who read business magazines instead of comic books. My parents, both factory workers at the local paper mill, had encouraged my interests with the limited resources they had. They saved for a decent computer, drove me to the library every weekend, and celebrated every academic achievement with genuine pride. Sarah, 3 years older, had been the social butterfly. Popular, charismatic, naturally gifted at reading people and situations. She glided through high school with a perfect combination of academic success and social status, earning a full scholarship to Oregon State University for communications and marketing. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Sarah Sullivan was destined for big things. I had earned a full academic scholarship, too, to Portland State for engineering and business. But while Sarah's achievements were celebrated with neighborhood barbecues and newspaper articles, mine were acknowledged with quiet nods and quick subject changes. Sarah's success was visible, relatable, impressive to people who understood social dynamics and professional hierarchies. My technical accomplishments were harder to explain, less glamorous, more difficult for our blue-collar community to fully appreciate. The pattern continued through college. Sarah joined sororities, led student government, interned at prestigious marketing firms, and graduated with a network of connections that immediately translated into career opportunities. I spent my college years in engineering labs and business libraries, developing patents for building automation systems, energy efficiency protocols, and facility management technologies. By the time I graduated, I held 6 patents and had already incorporated Sullivan Systems, a small company focused on commercial building optimization. Sarah had landed a prestigious position at a Seattle marketing agency, complete with a corner office, expense account, and company car. At family gatherings, her stories of client dinners and business trips dominated conversations, while my updates about technical innovations and modest business growth were met with polite but disinterested smiles. The divergence in perception crystallized during a particularly painful Thanksgiving dinner 3 years after graduation. Sarah arrived in a new BMW, wearing a tailored coat that probably cost more than I spent on clothing in a year. She regaled the family with stories of her recent promotion, her expanding responsibilities, her apartment in Seattle's trendy capital, Hill neighborhood. When conversation eventually turned to me, I mentioned that Sullivan Systems had just signed its largest contract to date, a comprehensive building automation project for a major commercial developer. "That's nice, honey," my mother had said, already turning back to Sarah. "How's your dating life? Any prospects?" My father, trying to show interest, asked what the contract was worth. When I mentioned the figure, $2.3 million, the table went quiet for a moment before Sarah laughed. "Jake's always been good with numbers," she said dismissively. "Too bad he never learned how to sell himself properly. You could probably make twice that working for a real company instead of this little handyman business you've got going on." The comment stung not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how fundamentally my own family misunderstood what I was building. Sullivan Systems wasn't a handyman business. It was a technology company that had developed revolutionary approaches to commercial building efficiency. The $2.3 million contract wasn't just revenue. It was validation of innovations that would eventually transform how commercial real estate operated. But explaining that would have required technical details they wouldn't understand, and business concepts they weren't interested in learning. So I smiled, nodded, and changed the subject to something safer. That night, driving home in my practical Honda Civic while Sarah's BMW gleamed in my parents' driveway, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I would stop, trying to translate my achievements into terms my family could understand. I would stop seeking validation for pursuits they couldn't appreciate. Instead, I would focus entirely on building something so substantial, so undeniably successful, that explanations would become unnecessary. The first major breakthrough came 6 months later, when a Fortune 500 company acquired 3 of my patents for $15 million. Instead of celebrating publicly or sharing the news with family, I quietly reinvested every dollar into expanding Sullivan Systems. I hired engineers, developers, and business strategists. I began acquiring smaller competitors, integrating their technologies and client bases into a growing network of commercial property services. Within 2 years, Sullivan Systems had evolved into Sullivan Enterprises, a diversified portfolio of companies focused on commercial real estate, facility management, and building technologies. We managed properties across 6 states, employed over 400 people, and generated annual revenues exceeding $50 million. I still showed up to family dinners, in work clothes, driving the same Honda Civic, living in the same modest apartment. The only difference was that now the work clothes were specifically chosen costumes. The apartment was a carefully maintained cover story, and the Honda was one of 17 vehicles I owned, selected specifically for its ability to reinforce perceptions about my limited success. Sarah's career, meanwhile, had continued its upward trajectory. She'd moved to Portland 2 years earlier to join Pinnacle Marketing Solutions as a senior account manager, bringing her Seattle sophistication and proven track record to one of the city's most respected agencies. She'd purchased a stylish condo in the Pearl District, drove a leased Audi, and had become the family's undisputed success story. At last year's Christmas gathering, she'd announced her engagement to Bradley Hoffman, a fellow marketing executive with political aspirations and inherited wealth. The wedding was planned for next spring at a vineyard in Sonoma County. Sarah had shown photos of the venue, the dress, the catering options, all while casually mentioning the six-figure budget like it was a reasonable expense for people who understood quality. "You should try to meet someone, Jake," she'd suggested after describing the elaborate wedding plans. "Maybe someone from work. I'm sure there are some nice secretaries or administrative assistants in that building you clean. Someone who'd appreciate a steady paycheck and simple lifestyle." I had smiled and agreed that finding the right person was important, while mentally calculating whether the building she thought I merely cleaned generated more monthly revenue than her annual salary. It did, by a factor of 12. The irony of our reversed positions would have been amusing if it weren't so isolating. Sarah worked for a company that occupied 2 floors of a building I owned. She paid rent on a condo in a complex my investment group had acquired the previous year. Her engagement ring had been purchased from a jewelry store in a shopping center my company managed. She lived her successful life entirely within an ecosystem I had built, while viewing me as the family member who couldn't quite get his act together. But the isolation wasn't entirely unwelcome. It has taught me valuable lessons about perception versus reality, about the power of controlling information, and about the freedom that comes from operating without others' expectations or limitations. While Sarah navigated office politics and client demands, worrying about appearances and professional relationships, I made decisions based purely on strategic merit and long-term vision. My business empire had grown through careful acquisition and integration rather than flashy expansion. I preferred to buy existing successful companies and improve their operations rather than starting new ventures from scratch. It was less glamorous but more reliable, building wealth and influence through steady accumulation rather than dramatic announcements. The approach had led me to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions 6 months ago. They were a well-managed agency with strong client relationships and consistent profitability, but their growth had plateaued. Their aging founder was interested in retirement. Their technology infrastructure needed updating, and their financial structure could benefit from the kind of strategic investment my company specialized in. The acquisition negotiations had been conducted through intermediaries and legal representatives, maintaining the anonymity I preferred for major transactions. Marcus Reed, Pinnacle's founder, knew he was selling to Sullivan Enterprises, but the name meant nothing to him beyond the financial credentials and business plan our representatives had presented. Sarah had mentioned the pending sale at recent family dinners, expressing anxiety about potential changes to her job security and company culture. "You never know what new owners will do," she'd worried aloud. "They might clean the house, bring in their own people, completely change everything we've built." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I'd offered sympathetic murmurs and generic reassurances about how good employees usually weather transitions successfully. Internally, I'd been reviewing her personnel file, performance evaluations, and client management records, preparing to make decisions about Pinnacle's future based on objective data rather than family relationships. The acquisition was scheduled to be finalized today, with an announcement to employees scheduled for this afternoon, which meant that in approximately 6 hours, Sarah would discover that her little brother, the one she'd been mocking for years as an underachiever with a dead-end job, was about to become her boss. I finished mopping the executive conference room on the 28th floor, the same room where Pinnacle's leadership team would gather this afternoon to meet their new owner. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been maintaining this space for years while planning to eventually own the company that used it. My earpiece chimed softly with an incoming call from my attorney. Jake, final documents are ready for signature. Marcus will be there at 2 p.m. for the completion meeting. Are you still planning to maintain your current cover during the initial announcement? I glanced around the empty conference room, imagining Sarah's face when she realized the truth. Yes, I said quietly. I think it's time for a proper introduction. As I wheeled my cart toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. The man looking back appeared to be exactly what everyone expected: a competent building maintenance worker, reliable but unremarkable, invisible to most of the people whose professional lives intersected with his daily routine. In 6 hours, that comfortable invisibility would end forever. And Sarah's world, along with her assumptions about success, family, and the limitations of people she thought she understood, would never be the same. The lunch invitation had arrived via text at 11:30 a.m., just as I was installing new LED fixtures in the fourth-floor accounting firm's reception area. Sarah's message was characteristically brief. Celebrating my promotion at Romano's Bistro. 12:30. You should come. Everyone from work will be there. Try to dress nicely for once. Romano's Bistro occupied prime real estate on Northwest 23rd Avenue, the kind of upscale establishment where Portland's young professionals gathered to see and be seen. I knew it well, not as a customer, but as the building owner who had personally approved their lease application 3 years earlier. The monthly rent they paid helped fund the very lifestyle Sarah was about to celebrate. I changed out of my maintenance uniform in the building's employee locker room, switching to dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing too polished. It was important to maintain the careful balance of looking presentable without appearing too successful. Over the years, I'd perfected this costume, clothes nice enough to avoid embarrassing my family, but modest enough to reinforce their assumptions about my limited means. The walk to Romano's took 15 minutes through the neighborhood I'd helped revitalize. Half the buildings on these blocks had been acquired, renovated, and repositioned by Sullivan Enterprises over the past 5 years. The trendy coffee shops, boutique retailers, and professional services that gave the area its current cachet existed, largely because of strategic investments my company had made in infrastructure, security, and tenant mix optimization. Sarah sat at a large corner table surrounded by her colleagues from Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Even from across the restaurant, her animated gestures and bright laughter dominated the space. She wore a burgundy blazer that probably cost more than most people spent on clothing in 6 months, her blonde hair styled in the kind of precision cut that required weekly maintenance appointments. As I approached the table, conversations gradually died down. Sarah's colleagues studied me with the polite curiosity reserved for family members who didn't quite fit the expected mold. I recognized several faces from building security footage and employee directories, though they had no reason to recognize me. "Everyone, this is my little brother Jake," Sarah announced, her tone carrying the subtle undertone of affectionate condescension she'd perfected over decades. "The one I've told you about who works maintenance at the Meridian Tower." A chorus of polite greetings followed as I took the empty chair Sarah had saved beside her. The introductions revealed the hierarchy of Pinnacle's organizational structure: senior account managers, creative directors, digital strategists, and junior associates. Each person's title and background were recited with the precision of someone who understood that professional identity was paramount in this crowd. "Jake's the practical one in our family," Sarah continued, settling into what I recognized as her familiar narrative about our divergent paths. While I was off getting my degree and building my career, he was learning real-world skills. There's definitely something to be said for honest work that doesn't require sitting in meetings all day. The comment was delivered with a smile, but I caught the underlying message. Honest work was admirable in its simplicity, but it wasn't quite as valuable as the sophisticated professional challenges Sarah and her colleagues navigated daily. "What exactly do you do at the Meridian Tower?" asked Rebecca Chen, Pinnacle's creative director. Her question seemed genuinely interesting rather than condescending. "Facility management," I replied simply. Keeping everything running smoothly, so the businesses can focus on what they do best. That's actually fascinating, said David Kim, a senior account manager. Commercial building operations must be incredibly complex. All the different systems, regulatory requirements, tenant needs. I nodded, appreciating his recognition of the field's complexity. It can be challenging. Technology has changed a lot of what we do over the past decade. Jake's being modest, Sarah interjected with a laugh. He pushes a mop around and fixes broken light bulbs. Don't make it sound more glamorous than it is. An uncomfortable silence followed her comment. Rebecca shifted in her seat. David studied his menu with sudden intensity, and the junior associates exchanged glances that suggested they recognized the casual cruelty of Sarah's dismissal. Well, said Amanda Foster, Pinnacle's newest hire, facility management sounds like it requires a lot of different skills. Problem-solving, project coordination, vendor management. Exactly, I agreed, grateful for her diplomatic intervention. Plus budgeting, compliance issues, emergency response planning. See what I mean? Sarah said, apparently oblivious to the tension she'd created. Jake's always been good with the practical stuff, just never had much ambition for anything bigger. The conversation moved on to safer topics: the restaurant's menu, weekend plans, industry gossip. I listened mostly, contributing occasional observations while studying the group dynamics. These were talented, ambitious people who had built successful careers through intelligence and hard work. They were also completely unaware that their professional futures were about to be determined by the man they'd just met, the one Sarah had casually dismissed as lacking ambition. So what are we celebrating? I asked during a lull in conversation. Sarah's face lit up with renewed enthusiasm. I just got promoted to senior account director, youngest person in the company's history. To reach that level, plus, they're giving me the Morrison Industries account, our biggest client. Genuine congratulations flowed from around the table. Morrison Industries was indeed Pinnacle's largest account, a regional construction company that generated roughly 30% of the agency's annual revenue. Managing that relationship was a significant responsibility that spoke well of Sarah's professional capabilities. That's a major account, David noted. Morrison's been with us for, 8 years? 9, Sarah corrected. And they specifically requested me for the transition. Said they were impressed with my strategic thinking on the Henderson project last quarter. I nodded appropriately, while mentally reviewing Morrison Industries' file from my own records. They were indeed a substantial client, but one whose relationship with Pinnacle had grown increasingly strained over the past 18 months. Their account manager had departed 6 months ago amid whispered concerns about service quality and responsiveness. Sarah's promotion appeared to be Pinnacle's attempt to revitalize a relationship that was showing signs of serious deterioration. The timing couldn't be better, Rebecca added, especially with all the uncertainty about the ownership change. What ownership change? I asked, feigning ignorance. The company's being sold, Amanda explained. Marcus Reed is retiring and selling to some investment group called Sullivan Enterprises. Nobody knows much about them, but word is the deal closes today. Today? Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I thought it wasn't happening until next week. Marcus sent an email this morning, David said. All hands meeting at 2 p.m. to meet the new owners and discuss the transition. Sarah set down her fork, suddenly looking less celebratory. What if they don't like the existing management structure? What if my promotion gets reversed before I even start? That won't happen, Rebecca assured her. You're too valuable. Anyone with sense would recognize your contribution to the company. But what if they don't have sense? Sarah's voice carried a note of genuine anxiety. What if there's some corporate raiders who just want to strip assets and cut costs? What if they bring in their own people and push out everyone who was here before? I watched my sister's confidence evaporate as she contemplated scenarios that threatened her carefully constructed professional identity. For someone who had always succeeded through charm and competence, the prospect of factors beyond her control determining her future was clearly unsettling. "You're overthinking this," David said gently. "Good marketing agencies are hard to find. Any smart buyer would want to keep the existing team intact." "Unless they're not smart," Sarah muttered. "Unless there's some blue-collar operation that doesn't understand what we do here." The irony was overwhelming. Sarah was literally describing my business philosophy while casting it as her worst nightmare. Sullivan Enterprises had indeed built its success through practical, blue-collar approaches to business problems. We prioritized substance over style, results over relationships, long-term value over short-term impressions. "What kind of company is Sullivan Enterprises?" I asked, curious to hear their research. "Nobody knows," Amanda said. "They've kept a really low profile. All we know is they own commercial real estate and facility management companies throughout the Northwest." "Facility management?" Sarah's eyes widened with horror. "Oh God, what if they think marketing is just overhead? What if they tried to turn us into some kind of building maintenance operation?" The table fell silent as everyone contemplated this possibility. I struggled to maintain a neutral expression while my sister unknowingly described exactly what was about to happen, though not in the way she imagined. "I'm sure it'll be fine," Rebecca said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Marcus wouldn't sell to someone who didn't understand the business." "Marcus is 73 and wants to retire to Arizona," Sarah said bitterly. "He'd sell to anyone who met his asking price." As lunch wound down, Sarah's mood had shifted from celebration to apprehension. The promotion she'd been excited about an hour earlier now felt precarious, dependent on variables she couldn't control or even identify. Her colleagues offered reassurances, but I could see the same uncertainty in their faces. When the check arrived, Sarah automatically reached for her corporate credit card, then paused. "Actually, maybe I should be more careful with expenses until we know what the new owners expect." I pulled out my wallet, extracting cash to cover my portion. The bills were crisp and new, a small detail that might have been noticed by someone paying attention, but the table was too focused on their anxieties about the afternoon's meeting to register such subtleties. As we prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jake, can you walk back with me? I need to vent for a few minutes before this meeting." We left Romano's together, her colleagues heading back to prepare for the 2 p.m. announcement, while Sarah and I took a longer route through the neighborhood. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under our feet as we walked past the buildings and businesses that comprised my hidden empire. "I've worked so hard to get where I am," Sarah said, her earlier confidence replaced by vulnerability I rarely saw from her. 7 years building relationships, proving myself, earning respect. What if all that gets wiped out because some new owners don't understand what I bring to the company? For the first time in years, I felt genuinely sympathetic toward my sister. Her fears weren't unfounded. Acquisitions often led to significant changes in personnel and priorities. What she couldn't know was that her professional future had already been determined not by strangers making arbitrary decisions, but by someone who had been quietly observing her performance for years. "Maybe the new owners will surprise you," I suggested. "Maybe they'll recognize talent when they see it." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face me. "God, I hope so. I just wish I knew something about them. Anything at all." We had reached the Meridian Tower, where my maintenance cart waited in the lobby and her office waited 28 floors above. In 1 hour, our paths would converge in that conference room, and Sarah would discover that everything she thought she knew about success, family, and the nature of power was about to change forever. "I should get back to work," I said, adjusting the tool belt I'd retrieved from the lobby security desk. Sarah nodded absently, her mind already focused on the afternoon's uncertainties. "Thanks for coming to lunch, Jake. It meant a lot to have family there, even if—" She trailed off, perhaps recognizing that her earlier comments hadn't been entirely kind. "Good luck with the meeting," I said simply. As the elevator doors closed between us, carrying Sarah toward her office and me toward the service levels, I realized that in 60 minutes, our relationship would be fundamentally altered. The careful balance of perceptions and assumptions that had defined our interactions for decades was about to crumble, leaving us to navigate territory neither of us had ever imagined. The countdown to revelation had begun. The service elevator carried me to the building's mechanical levels, a maze of corridors and utility rooms that existed entirely below the awareness of the companies operating above. Down here, surrounded by HVAC systems, electrical panels, and communication hubs, I could finally drop the careful performance that had defined my morning. My phone buzzed with a text from my executive assistant, Catherine Walsh. Conference room. Prepared for 2 p.m. Legal team standing by. Marcus Reed confirmed his attendance. Do you want me to brief the Pinnacle employees beforehand or maintain the surprise element? I typed back quickly. Surprise element, but have HR files ready for immediate review. I want full performance data on all senior staff before we begin. The key? Truth was, I'd been studying Pinnacle's personnel records for months. Every promotion, performance review, client feedback report, and internal communication had been analyzed as part of my due diligence process. Sarah's professional trajectory was as familiar to me as my own business strategies, though she had no idea her career had been under such scrutiny. What I'd discovered was more complex than her dismissive comments about my lack of ambition would suggest. Sarah was genuinely talented at client relationship management, with consistently high satisfaction scores and retention rates. Her strategic thinking was solid, if sometimes overly focused on short-term wins rather than long-term positioning. She had leadership potential, but struggled with delegation, often micromanaging junior staff while taking on responsibilities that should have been distributed across her team. Most telling were the patterns in her peer evaluations. Colleagues respected her competence but noted a tendency toward competitiveness that sometimes undermined collaborative projects. Several reviews mentioned her habit of claiming credit for group successes while distancing herself from shared failures. It painted a picture of someone driven to succeed, but not always careful about how that success was achieved. None of this information would influence my decision about Pinnacle's future leadership structure. Business was business, and family relationships couldn't be allowed to cloud strategic judgment. But understanding Sarah's professional strengths and weaknesses would be crucial for managing the transition once her initial shock wore off. I made my way to the building's central security office, a room filled with monitors displaying feeds from every floor, elevator, and common area. The head of security, Tom Rodriguez, had worked for me for 6 years, though he was one of only 3 people in the building who knew my true identity. "Afternoon, Mr. Sullivan," he said, glancing up from a bank of screens showing various office activities throughout the tower. "Everything set for the big reveal?" "As ready as we can be," I replied, settling into a chair beside him. "How's the mood upstairs?" Tom switched to the camera feed from Pinnacle's office on the 27th floor. Through high-definition monitors, we could see employees clustered in small groups, their body language suggesting nervous anticipation. Sarah sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen with the focused intensity of someone trying to research information that didn't exist in public databases. "They're definitely anxious," Tom observed. "Lots of hushed conversations, people checking job boards on their computers when they think nobody's looking. Your sister's been on the phone with headhunters for the past hour." That information was surprising. Sarah had given no indication during lunch that she was considering leaving Pinnacle. Either her anxiety about the acquisition was deeper than she'd revealed, or she was simply exploring options as a precautionary measure. "Has she found anything interesting?" I asked. Tom pulled up the detailed monitoring logs that tracked all external communications from company devices. 3 calls to recruitment firms, 2 to former colleagues at other agencies. Looks like she's testing the market, seeing what's available if things go badly this afternoon. I studied the screen showing Sarah at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, taking notes on a legal pad. The confidence she'd displayed at lunch had completely evaporated, replaced by the calculated urgency of someone preparing for potential career disruption. It was a side of my sister I'd never seen before. Strategic, proactive, perhaps even vulnerable. "Mr. Sullivan," Tom said quietly, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, though my attention remained focused on the monitor. "Why keep the family thing secret for so long? I mean, your sister works here. She's good at her job from what I can tell. Wouldn't it have been easier to just, I don't know, help her out? Give her a heads up about what you were building?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself countless times over the years. The simple answer was that secrecy had become a habit, a protective mechanism that had served me well in business and personal relationships. But the deeper truth was more complicated. "Have you ever been consistently underestimated by people you care about?" I asked Tom. He considered this. "My dad never thought I'd amount to much. High school dropout, wrong crowd, you know the story. But when you proved him wrong, how did it feel?" "Good," Tom admitted. "Really good, actually. Now imagine he still doesn't know you proved him wrong. Imagine he still sees you exactly the way he did when you were 17, still treats you like that person, still makes the same assumptions about your potential." Tom's expression shifted as he understood the parallel. "That would be frustrating as hell." "Exactly. Now imagine you have the power to change his perception instantly, but doing so would also change the fundamental nature of your relationship with him forever. No going back, no pretending the underestimation never happened." "So you're saying the reveal is permanent," Tom said. "Once your family knows who you really are, everything changes." "Everything," I confirmed. "The question becomes whether what you gain is worth what you lose." On the monitor, Sarah had finished her phone calls and was now reviewing what appeared to be her personal financial documents. She pulled out a calculator, ran some numbers, then sat back in her chair with an expression I recognized from childhood. The look she got when facing a problem that couldn't be solved through charm or determination alone. "What do you think you'll lose?" Tom asked. I thought about this morning's lunch, the easy camaraderie despite Sarah's condescending comments, the familiar dynamic of sibling relationships uncomplicated by power imbalances or professional considerations. After today, every interaction would be filtered through the knowledge of our changed circumstances. She could never again see me as simply her underachieving little brother, and I could never again observe her professional life from the comfortable distance of anonymity. "Simplicity," I said finally. "The ability to just be family without all the other complications. But you're doing it anyway. Business requires it. And maybe—" I paused, watching Sarah organize her desk with the methodical precision of someone preparing for battle. "Maybe it's time she saw me clearly, even if that changes everything between us." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, I think she'll handle it better than you expect. She's tougher than she looks." That was true. Sarah had always been resilient, capable of adapting to changing circumstances with remarkable speed. But this wasn't just a change in circumstances. It was a complete inversion of everything she thought she knew about family hierarchy, professional, success, and the nature of achievement itself. My phone buzzed with another message from Catherine. "Marcus Reed has arrived. He's reviewing final documents in conference room A. Pinnacle leadership team has been notified that the meeting will begin in 15 minutes. Are you ready to head up?" I looked at Tom, who was watching the monitor showing conference room A, where Marcus Reed sat alone at the polished table, signing the last of the acquisition paperwork. In a few minutes, he would walk down the hall to conference room B, where Sarah and her colleagues waited to meet their new owner. "Time to go," I said, standing and straightening my maintenance uniform one last time. "Good luck, Mr. Sullivan," Tom said, "though something tells me you won't need it." As I headed toward the elevator that would carry me to the 27th floor, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years of careful construction, strategic patience, and deliberate invisibility were about to culminate in a single conversation that would redefine not just my relationship with Sarah, but her understanding of success, family, and the dangers of assuming you know someone's story based on surface appearances. The elevator climbed steadily upward, carrying me from the hidden infrastructure of my empire toward the moment when everything hidden would finally be revealed. 27 floors to travel the distance between who I appeared to be and who I actually was. Sarah was about to discover that sometimes the person you've been looking down on has actually been looking out for you all along. Conference Room B buzzed with nervous energy as Pinnacle's staff assembled for the announcement that would reshape their professional lives. I positioned myself in the maintenance alcove adjacent to the room, ostensibly checking the building's climate control systems while actually observing the pre-meeting dynamics through the glass partition. Sarah had arrived early, claiming a seat, with clear sightlines to both the presentation area and the entrance. Her burgundy blazer was perfectly pressed, her posture confident despite the anxiety I'd witnessed in the security footage. She'd transformed herself back into the polished, professional persona that had carried her through 7 years of career advancement. Rebecca Chen sat beside her laptop open, taking notes from what appeared to be a hastily assembled research document about Sullivan Enterprises. Their conversation was animated but hushed, Sarah gesturing emphatically, while Rebecca nodded and occasionally typed additional notes. David Kim occupied a chair near the back, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed printed materials that looked like financial projections. As Pinnacle's most senior account manager, he understood better than most how acquisitions typically affected existing staff structures. His calm demeanor suggested either confidence in his own value to the organization or resignation to whatever changes might come. Amanda Foster, the newest team member, sat quietly near the window, her youth and inexperience making her the most vulnerable to potential restructuring. She checked her phone frequently, perhaps texting updates to friends or family about the uncertain afternoon ahead. The room gradually filled with Pinnacle's complete staff, 23 employees ranging from senior leadership to junior associates, creative specialists to administrative support. Each person carried their own anxieties about job security, career progression, and professional identity under new ownership. Marcus Reed entered at exactly 1:58 p.m., his familiar presence providing a momentary sense of continuity in an otherwise uncertain situation. At 73, he moved with the careful dignity of someone who had spent decades building and leading a successful business. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored, and his expression carried the mixture of pride and melancholy that accompanied significant life transitions. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had guided Pinnacle through nearly 2 decades of growth and success. "I know this has been a period of uncertainty for all of you, and I appreciate your patience. During the transition process," he moved to the front of the room, positioning himself behind the presentation podium with practiced ease. "As you know, after considerable deliberation, I've decided to retire and transfer ownership of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions to new leadership. This wasn't an easy decision, but I'm confident it's the right one for both my personal future and the company's continued growth." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her attention completely focused on Marcus's words. Around the room, other staff members displayed varying degrees of tension, some tapping pens nervously, others maintaining carefully neutral expressions that concealed their true feelings about the impending changes. "The acquisition has been completed as of this afternoon," Marcus continued. "Our new parent company is Sullivan Enterprises, a diversified business organization with extensive experience in commercial operations, facility management, and strategic growth initiatives." I watched Sarah's face closely as Marcus mentioned Sullivan Enterprises' focus areas. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the same look she'd worn at lunch when contemplating the possibility of blue-collar ownership that might not understand or value marketing services. "Sullivan Enterprises has committed to maintaining Pinnacle's core mission and client relationships," Marcus said, addressing the room's primary concern. However, as with any transition of this magnitude, there will be opportunities for operational improvements and strategic realignment. Rebecca raised her hand. What does that mean for existing staff? Are there plans for layoffs or restructuring? Marcus smiled diplomatically. Those decisions will be made by the new ownership team based on performance metrics, strategic fit, and long-term business objectives. I can tell you that Sullivan Enterprises has expressed strong interest in retaining talented personnel who align with their organizational values. The diplomatic non-answer did little to ease the room's anxiety. Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with David, who shrugged slightly in response. They both understood that corporate speak about strategic realignment often preceded significant personnel changes. When do we meet the new owners? Asked Jennifer Walsh, Pinnacle's creative director. What's their background in marketing and advertising? Actually, Marcus said, checking his watch, the primary decision-maker from Sullivan Enterprises should be joining us momentarily. As for their background, he paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully. Let's just say they bring a unique perspective to business operations that may surprise you. Amanda shifted nervously in her seat. Are they planning to relocate operations, change our office space, or client focus? I'll let them address those questions directly, Marcus replied. But I can assure you that Sullivan Enterprises has extensive experience with this building and understands the practical requirements of maintaining professional operations here. That comment triggered a small frown from Sarah. Marcus's phrasing suggested the new owners were already familiar with the Meridian Tower, which could mean they had other business interests in the building. Or it could mean something else entirely, though Sarah couldn't yet imagine what that might be. A soft knock interrupted Marcus's presentation. Through the glass partition, I could see Catherine Walsh approaching with a tablet and a professional smile that concealed her awareness of the dramatic revelation about to unfold. "Excuse me," Catherine said, entering the room with practiced confidence. "I'm Catherine Walsh, executive assistant to Sullivan Enterprises CEO. He's ready to meet with everyone now." Sarah studied Catherine with the sharp attention she typically reserved for analyzing new clients. Well-dressed, articulate, carrying herself with the quiet authority that suggested access to real power. Not what Sarah would have expected from a facility management company's support staff. "Where is he?" Rebecca asked, glancing toward the door expectantly. Catherine smiled. "Actually, he's been here all day. He prefers to observe operations personally before making any significant changes. It's part of his hands-on management philosophy." The room erupted in quiet murmurs as staff members processed this information. Someone from Sullivan Enterprises had been in the building, watching them work, evaluating their performance without their knowledge. The implications were both unsettling and intriguing. "Has he been meeting with Marcus?" David asked. "Among other activities," Catherine replied diplomatically. "He's quite thorough in his due diligence processes." Sarah's expression had shifted from anxiety to curiosity. As someone who prided herself on understanding corporate dynamics and power structures, she was clearly trying to decode the unusual approach Sullivan Enterprises had taken to the acquisition. "What's his background?" Sarah asked directly. "Marketing. Finance? Operations? Diverse experience across multiple sectors," Catherine answered. "He started in technical fields but expanded into business operations, strategic development, and investment management. Very much a hands-on leader who believes in understanding every aspect of the businesses he acquires." I watched this exchange. From my position in the maintenance alcove, marveling at Catherine's skill in providing accurate information while maintaining the element of surprise that would make the next few minutes so memorable. Marcus glanced at his watch again. "Perhaps we should proceed with the introduction." Catherine nodded. "I'll get him now. Fair warning, his approach to business meetings is somewhat unconventional, but I think you'll find him very knowledgeable about your industry and committed to Pinnacle's continued success. As Catherine left to retrieve me, the room's energy shifted into heightened anticipation. Staff members straightened in their chairs, checked their appearance, and prepared to meet the person who would determine their professional futures. Sarah smoothed her blazer and ran a quick hand through her hair, transforming her posture into the confident stance she used for important client presentations. Whatever her anxieties about Sullivan Enterprises' background, she was clearly determined to make a strong first impression on the new ownership. Around the room, similar preparations were taking place as 23 talented professionals prepared to meet someone they assumed would be a stranger. Someone whose business philosophy and management style would reshape their daily work lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. None of them suspected that the person walking through that door in 30 seconds was someone Sarah had been dismissing and underestimating for 32 years. Someone who had been quietly building an empire while she assumed he was barely capable of maintaining steady employment. The moment of revelation was finally at hand. I stepped out of the maintenance alcove and walked toward Conference Room B, still wearing my navy polo shirt with Sullivan Facility Services embroidered on the chest. My tool belt had been left behind, but I carried a simple leather portfolio that contained the acquisition documents and strategic plans for Pinnacle's integration into my business empire. The conversations in the conference room died as I appeared. In the doorway, 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to recognition to dawning comprehension. Sarah's face went through a remarkable transformation: puzzlement at seeing her brother, followed by embarrassment at his unexpected appearance during an important business meeting, then complete bewilderment as the implications began to register. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, stepping into the room with the calm confidence that had carried me through countless boardroom presentations over the past 8 years. "I'm Jake Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Enterprises." The silence that followed was profound. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for more information, but the stunned stillness of minds struggling to process impossible information. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, then closed again without producing sound. Her eyes darted from my face to Marcus Reed, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what she was hearing. Rebecca Chen was the first to find her voice. "I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion. This is Jake, Sarah's brother. He works maintenance here in the building." "I do work in this building," I confirmed, moving to the front of the room where Marcus stood with a knowing smile. "I own it, actually, along with the rest of the block and 16 other commercial properties throughout the Pacific Northwest." "David E." Kim leaned forward in his chair, his analytical mind beginning to process the situation. "You're saying Sarah's brother is our new owner?" "That's correct," I replied, opening my portfolio and extracting the signed acquisition documents. As of 2:47 p.m. today, Sullivan Enterprises completed the purchase of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions for $23.5 million. The transaction included all assets, client contracts, and personnel agreements. Amanda Foster raised her hand tentatively. "But you're wearing a maintenance uniform." "Sullivan Facility Services is one of my subsidiary companies," I explained. "I've been personally overseeing building operations here for the past 8 years. It's given me excellent insight into how all the tenant companies function, including Pinnacle." Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "This isn't real. This is some kind of joke." I turned to face her directly for the first time since entering the room. "It's very real, Sarah. I've been building Sullivan Enterprises since I was 24 years old. We now employ over 800 people across 12 states and generate annual revenues exceeding $150 million. The numbers hung in the air like a challenge to everything Sarah thought she knew about success, family, and the nature of achievement. Her face had gone pale, and she gripped the edge of the conference table as if it were the only stable thing in a suddenly tilted world. "I don't understand," she said, her voice stronger now but carrying an undertone of something between betrayal and disbelief. You clean offices. You drive a beat-up Honda. You live in that tiny apartment above the hardware store. I maintain strategic oversight of commercial properties, I corrected gently. The Honda is an excellent cover for someone who prefers anonymity, and the apartment above Sullivan Hardware, which I also own, provides convenient access to multiple business locations without drawing unwanted attention. Marcus Reed cleared his throat and addressed the room. I've been aware of Mr. Sullivan's unique approach to business operations throughout our negotiations. His preference for hands-on management and operational anonymity is unconventional but highly effective. Jennifer Walsh, the creative director, spoke up with obvious confusion. Why would you pretend to be a maintenance worker if you own the building? Because, I said, settling into the chair at the head of the conference table. People reveal their true character when they think you're not important enough to impress. I've learned more about this company's culture, challenges, and opportunities in 8 years of invisible observation than I could have discovered through traditional due diligence processes. Sarah's shock was giving way to something else. A mixture of anger and humiliation that I recognized from childhood moments when she'd been caught in assumptions that proved embarrassing. So this whole time you've been watching us? Judging. Us? Pretending to be something you're not? I've been learning, I replied. About market dynamics, operational efficiency, personnel management. Your company has been an excellent case study in both effective marketing strategies and missed opportunities for growth. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from confusion to grudging respect. This is actually brilliant. You've had access to insider information about every company in the building. You knew exactly what you were buying. More importantly, David added, his business instincts overriding his personal shock, you understand our actual operational challenges, not just what shows up in quarterly reports. Amanda looked between Sarah and me with obvious fascination. How long have you been planning to acquire Pinnacle specifically? 18 months, I answered. Your client retention rates are excellent, your creative work is consistently strong, and your market positioning is solid. However, your technology infrastructure needs upgrading. Your profit margins could be improved through operational efficiencies, and your growth has plateaued due to conservative strategic planning. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward. You can't be serious about this. You can't just waltz in here and take over my career because you've been playing some elaborate game of dress-up. The room went quiet again, everyone recognizing that we'd moved beyond business discussion into deeply personal territory. Sarah's professional composure had cracked, revealing the raw emotions underneath, feelings of betrayal, embarrassment, and perhaps most painful of all, the realization that her assumptions about family hierarchy had been completely wrong. This isn't a game, Sarah, I said quietly. This is my life's work. Sullivan Enterprises employs 847 people across 43 different businesses. We've invested over $200 million in commercial real estate development, created jobs in 12 states, and generated returns for investors who trusted us with their capital. I stood and moved to the whiteboard, where I wrote a series of numbers that represented Pinnacle's performance metrics from the past 3 years. Your personal performance has been strong. Client satisfaction scores consistently above 90%. Retention, rates in the top quartile for agencies your size, revenue growth averaging 12% annually. Sarah stared at the numbers, recognizing her own professional achievements reflected in data she hadn't expected me to possess. You've been tracking my work? I track everything, I said simply. It's how businesses grow. Data-driven decisions rather than assumptions or personal relationships. Marcus gathered his papers and moved toward the door. I'll leave you all to discuss the transition details. Jake, thank you for providing such a smooth acquisition process. Sarah, you're in excellent hands. After Marcus left, the room felt smaller, more intimate. The formal acquisition meeting had become something much more personal, a reckoning between siblings whose relationship had been built on fundamentally false assumptions. "I need some air," Sarah said suddenly, moving toward the door. "Sarah, wait!" I called after her. She stopped at the threshold but didn't turn around. "Why, Jake? Why keep this secret for so long? Why let me think you were? Why let me treat you like—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood what she was asking. Why had I allowed years of condescending comments, dismissive assumptions, and casual cruelty about my supposed lack of ambition? "Because," I said, addressing her back since she still wouldn't face me, "I needed to know who I could become without your expectations limiting me, and I needed to understand who you really were when you thought my opinion didn't matter." Sarah's shoulders tensed, but she still didn't turn around. The rest of the staff sat in uncomfortable silence, witnessing a family confrontation that none of them had anticipated when they'd arrived for a routine acquisition meeting. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked quietly, breaking the tension. I returned to my seat at the head of the table, assuming the position of authority that was no longer hidden or ambiguous. "Now, we move forward. Pinnacle will operate as an independent subsidiary of Sullivan Enterprises. Existing staff will be evaluated based on performance and cultural fit. Changes will be strategic, not personal." Sarah finally turned around, her eyes red but her posture regaining some of its professional composure. "And me? What happened to me?" I met her gaze directly. "That depends entirely on whether you can adapt to the new reality. Can you work for your little brother, Sarah? Can you take direction from someone you've spent years treating as an underachiever?" The question hung between us, carrying the weight of 3 decades of family dynamics and professional ambitions. In that moment, everything we thought we knew about success, family, and power had to be completely reimagined. Sarah remained frozen in the doorway for several long seconds, her professional instincts warring with personal emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. Around the conference table, her colleagues watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing a private family drama unfold in their workplace. "I need a moment," Sarah said finally, her voice barely controlled. I can't process this right now." She stepped out of the room, leaving behind a silence thick with unspoken questions and uncertain glances. Through the glass partition, I could see her walking quickly toward her office, her burgundy blazer a splash of color against the neutral tones of the hallway. Rebecca Chen was the first to speak, her voice careful and diplomatic. "Jake, sorry, Mr. Sullivan. Should we reschedule this meeting? Give everyone time to absorb what's happened?" I considered the suggestion, then shook my head. "No, we should continue." Sarah's personal adjustment to this situation is separate from the business transition that affects everyone in this room. David Kim leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "With respect, sir, Sarah is our senior account director and handles our largest client. Her personal adjustment might be quite relevant to business operations." It was a fair point, delivered with the kind of strategic thinking that had made David valuable to Pinnacle's operations. I appreciated both his directness and his subtle advocacy for Sarah, despite the awkward circumstances. "You're absolutely right," I acknowledged. "But right now, Sarah needs space to process. Forcing an immediate conversation would be counterproductive for everyone involved." Amanda Foster raised her hand tentatively. "Can I ask something? What do we call you now? This morning you were Jake from maintenance, but now you're our new owner." The question was simpler than it sounded, touching on issues of hierarchy, respect, and workplace culture that would need to be addressed systematically. "In professional settings, Mr. Sullivan is appropriate, but I'm not interested in dramatic changes to office culture. The relationships you've built, the collaborative atmosphere Marcus created, those things work well and should be preserved." Jennifer Walsh spoke up from the back of the room. "What about reporting structures? Are you planning to bring in outside management, or will existing leadership remain in place?" I opened my portfolio and extracted an organizational chart I'd prepared months earlier. Current management structure remains intact with one addition, myself as CEO, with Rebecca continuing as creative director and David as senior account manager. However, there will be new accountability metrics and performance standards. The UE chart showed Pinnacle's existing hierarchy with minimal changes, but included new oversight mechanisms and strategic planning requirements that would integrate the agency more closely with Sullivan Enterprises' other operations. "What kind of performance standards?" Rebecca asked, studying the chart carefully. "Data-driven evaluation rather than subjective assessment," I explained. "Client satisfaction surveys, retention analytics, project profitability analysis, creative effectiveness metrics. I want to understand not just what you're doing, but how well it's working and where we can improve." David nodded approvingly. "That's actually refreshing." Marcus was excellent to work for, but he relied heavily on intuition rather than systematic analysis. "Which brings me to the first major change," I continued, moving to the whiteboard. "Technology infrastructure. Your current systems are adequate but not optimized. We'll be implementing new project management software, client relationship platforms, and analytics tools over the next 6 months." I wrote a series of bullet points outlining the technological upgrades planned for Pinnacle's operations. The investments represented nearly $200,000 in new systems and training, a substantial commitment that demonstrated my serious intentions for the company's future. "These changes will require adaptation from everyone," I said, addressing the room. "There will be training programs, workflow adjustments, and new reporting requirements. Change is never comfortable, but it's necessary for growth." Amanda looked around the room nervously. "What if we can't adapt? What if the new systems don't work for some people?" "Then we'll work together to find solutions," I replied. "I'm not interested in losing talented people because of technological challenges. But I am interested in ensuring everyone contributes to improved performance and efficiency." Through the glass partition, I could see Sarah sitting at her desk, staring at her computer screen with the blank expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. Her phone rang several times, but she ignored it, apparently too overwhelmed to engage with normal work activities. Rebecca followed my gaze. "Should someone check on her? This can't be easy. Finding out your family member has been, well, secretly evaluating your professional performance for years." The comment carried a subtle edge that suggested Rebecca understood the ethical complexities of my situation. She was right to be concerned. My years of covert observation raised questions about privacy, fairness, and the boundaries between personal and professional relationships. "Sarah's professional performance has been evaluated the same way as everyone else's," I said carefully. "Personnel decisions will be based on objective criteria, not family relationships. But you already know more about her work habits, stress management, and interpersonal dynamics than any normal acquisition would reveal," David pointed out. "That's not exactly a level playing field." He was absolutely correct, and I respected him for raising the issue directly. The unconventional nature of my due diligence process created ethical questions that couldn't be dismissed with corporate platitudes about fairness and objectivity. "You're right," I admitted. "I do have more information than typical acquisition scenarios provide, but that information works both ways. I also understand Sarah's strengths, her value to client relationships, and her potential for growth within the organization." Jennifer looked skeptical. "And if she can't handle working for her younger brother? If the family dynamic makes it impossible for her to function effectively here?" It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Sarah's ability to adapt to our reversed professional relationship would determine not just her career future, but the long-term success of Pinnacle's integration into Sullivan Enterprises. "Then we'll address that situation when and if it develops," I said. "But I'm hoping Sarah's professionalism and intelligence will help her navigate this transition successfully." The meeting continued for another 45 minutes, covering operational details, timeline expectations, and individual concerns about the transition. Throughout the discussion, I found myself impressed by the staff's thoughtful questions and collaborative approach to problem solving. Marcus had built not just a successful business, but a strong team culture that would serve Pinnacle well under new ownership. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca approached me privately. "Jake, Mr. Sullivan, can I speak with you about Sarah?" We moved to a corner of the conference room while the other staff members gathered their materials and prepared to return to their regular work activities. "She's going to struggle with this," Rebecca said quietly. "Not because she's unprofessional, but because family dynamics are complicated. She's spent years seeing herself as the successful sibling, and now that entire identity has been challenged." Rebecca's insight was perceptive and compassionate, revealing the kind of emotional intelligence that made her effective as a creative director. She understood that Sarah's reaction wasn't just about professional hierarchy, but about fundamental questions of self-worth and family identity. "What would you suggest?" I asked. "Give her time to process privately before having any serious conversations about her future here," Rebecca advised. "And when you do talk, maybe consider meeting somewhere neutral rather than in an office setting that emphasizes the power dynamic." It was good advice that demonstrated Rebecca's leadership potential and her genuine concern for her colleagues' well-being. I made a mental note to consider her for additional responsibilities as Pinnacle's integration progressed. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Thank you for the perspective." As the conference room emptied, I remained behind to review my notes and prepare for the individual conversations that would follow over the coming days. Through the glass partition, I could see Sarah still sitting at her desk, now with her head in her hands, the weight of revelation finally settling over her. The easy part was over. The acquisition was complete, the staff had been informed, and the initial shock was beginning to fade. Now came the much harder work of rebuilding relationships, establishing new dynamics, and proving that business success and family loyalty could coexist without compromising either. But first, Sarah and I needed to have a conversation that was 8 years overdue. One that would determine whether we could move forward as siblings, as professional colleagues, or as both. 2 hours after the acquisition announcement, Sarah finally emerged from her office. The building had settled into its late afternoon rhythm, most employees focused on wrapping up daily tasks while processing the morning's revelations in quiet conversations and knowing glances. I was reviewing quarterly reports in what had been Marcus Reed's office, now mine, when Catherine knocked gently on the doorframe. "Your sister is asking to speak with you. She's waiting in the small conference room." Through my office window, I could see Sarah sitting alone at the round table in Conference Room C, the building's most informal meeting space. She'd removed her burgundy blazer and sat with her hands folded, staring out at the Portland skyline, as late afternoon sunlight painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and amber. "Tell her I'll be right there," I said, closing the laptop and gathering my thoughts for what would likely be the most important conversation of our adult lives. The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual, each step carrying me further from the comfortable anonymity I'd maintained for 8 years and closer to whatever new dynamic would define our relationship going forward. I knocked softly on the conference room door and waited for Sarah's quiet, "Come in," before entering. She didn't look up immediately, continuing to gaze out the window as I took the seat across from her. When she finally turned to face me, her eyes were red but clear, her expression calmer than I'd expected given the emotional storm she'd weathered since the revelation. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual confidence but carrying a new quality I'd never heard before, genuine uncertainty mixed with something that might have been respected. "About what?" I asked gently. "About every conversation we've had over the past 8 years, every family dinner where I made jokes about your dead-end job, every time I offered you career advice or suggested you needed to be more ambitious." She paused, shaking her head slowly. "I keep remembering specific comments, and they're all so condescending," I suggested when she trailed off. Cruel, she said simply. They were cruel, Jake. And the worst part is, I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was the successful one trying to motivate my struggling little brother. I leaned back in my chair, processing the vulnerability in her admission. This wasn't the polished, confident Sarah who dominated family gatherings and client presentations. This was someone grappling with the uncomfortable realization that her entire understanding of our relationship had been built on false assumptions. You weren't trying to be cruel, I said. You were operating with incomplete information. Information you deliberately withheld, she pointed out, a flash of her old assertiveness returning. Why, Jake? Why let me make a fool of myself for years when you could have just told me the truth? It was the question I'd been preparing to answer since deciding to acquire Pinnacle. But sitting across from Sarah's wounded expression made the carefully rehearsed explanations feel inadequate. Because I needed to prove something to myself, I said finally. That I could build something significant without anyone's help, approval, or interference. That success didn't require other people's permission or understanding. Sarah studied my face intently. And did you? Prove it, I mean. I considered the question seriously. Yes, but not in the way I expected. I proved I could create wealth and build businesses, but I also discovered that success without connection feels hollow. The isolation was more costly than I anticipated. So, this reveal, taking over my company, is this about reconnection? Or is it about finally showing me how wrong I was about you? Her directness surprised me. Sarah had always been emotionally intelligent, but I'd never seen her apply that intelligence to examining her own motivations and assumptions so honestly. Neither, I said. This is about moving forward authentically instead of maintaining separate identities that had become exhausting for both of us. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing this response while watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness settled over Portland. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new determination. I want to stay, she said. I want to work for Sullivan Enterprises for you, and I want to prove that I can handle this transition professionally, even though it means taking direction from your little brother. A small smile crossed her face, the first I'd seen from her since the revelation. You're not my little brother anymore, are you? You're Jake Sullivan, CEO of a $150 million company who owns half of downtown Portland. That's going to take some getting used to. I'm both, I said. That's what makes this complicated. Can you separate them? The family relationship from the professional one? It was perhaps the most important question she could have asked, cutting to the heart of whether our new dynamic could actually function in practice. I think so, I said carefully. But it will require clear boundaries and honest communication from both of us. No special treatment, no family conflicts bleeding into work decisions, no assumption that blood relationship trumps professional performance. Sarah nodded slowly. And if I screw up? If I can't adapt to the new systems or meet your performance standards? Then you'll face the same consequences as any other employee, I said. But I don't expect that to happen. Your work has been consistently excellent. The data doesn't lie, Sarah. You're genuinely good at what you do. The data, she repeated with a slight laugh. You really have been watching everything, haven't you? Everything that affects business performance, yes. Client feedback, project timelines, team collaboration, problem-solving under pressure. You excel in all those areas. For the first time since the revelation, Sarah looked genuinely pleased rather than overwhelmed. What about areas where I need improvement? The question revealed something important about her mindset. She was already thinking strategically about professional development, rather than dwelling on personal embarrassment. Technology adoption, I said without hesitation. You're competent, with current systems but resistant to change. The new platforms we're implementing will require flexibility and learning agility. I can work on that, she said immediately. What else? Delegation. You tend to micromanage junior staff instead. of developing their capabilities. It limits both their growth and your own strategic focus. Sarah grimaced but nodded. Yeah, I know that's an issue. Rebecca's mentioned it in performance reviews. And long-term strategic thinking, I continued. You're excellent at quarterly planning and annual goals, but the 5-year vision work needs development. Fair criticism, she acknowledged. So, what happens next? Do I get a formal performance improvement plan, new responsibilities, a probationary period? Her business-like approach to the conversation impressed me. Despite the personal upheaval, Sarah was already shifting into professional problem-solving mode. You get the Morrison Industries account you were promoted to handle, I said. Plus leadership of the new client analytics initiative I'm implementing across all our marketing subsidiaries. Sarah's eyes widened. All your marketing subsidiaries? How many are there? 7 in 4 states. Pinnacle will serve as the hub for developing analytics protocols and best practices that will be deployed across the entire network. The scope of opportunity I was describing clearly excited her. Sarah had always thrived on challenges that utilized her strategic thinking and leadership capabilities. That's a significant responsibility, she said. It's also a test, I admitted. Success in that role would position you for much larger leadership opportunities within Sullivan Enterprises. Failure would suggest your skills don't scale beyond single-company operations. Sarah straightened in her chair, her competitive instincts fully engaged. When do I start? Monday. Catherine will have the project details and resource requirements ready for you by then. And us? The family relationship? I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city I'd helped build while maintaining my carefully constructed anonymity. We figure it out as we go. New rules for a new situation. Sarah joined me at the window, standing beside me in comfortable silence for the first time in years. Below us, the lights of Portland stretched toward the horizon, representing thousands of businesses, dreams, and ambitions that kept the city's economic engine running. For what it's worth, Sarah said quietly, I'm proud of you, genuinely proud of what you've built and how you've built it. I just wish that you'd known sooner, that I'd seen you clearly enough to know without being told. As we stood there together, looking out at the city that had shaped both our careers in ways neither of us had fully understood, I realized that the revelation hadn't ended anything. It had simply begun a new chapter in our relationship, one that would require patience, understanding, and mutual respect to write successfully. The person everyone overlooked had finally stepped into the light. But the real test wouldn't be adjusting to visibility. It would be learning how to maintain authentic relationships while wielding the power that visibility revealed. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come not from dramatic external events, but from finally having the courage to show people who you really are. And sometimes, the people who think they know you best are the ones who need that revelation most. There's something else we need to discuss, I said, turning away from the window. The family situation is beyond just us. Sarah's expression grew, cautious. Mom and Dad? They're going to find out eventually. Probably sooner than later, given that your promotion will likely be covered in the local business journals. Portland marketing executive leads major analytics initiative for Sullivan Enterprises makes for good press. Sarah sat back down heavily. Oh God, I hadn't thought about that. They still think you barely make enough to cover rent on that apartment. Which brings us to a decision point, I said, settling back into my chair. Do we tell them together, or do you want time to process this privately first? Together, Sarah said immediately, then paused. Actually, no. I think I need to talk to them first. They need to hear from me that I've been wrong about you for years before they learn about all this. I appreciated her instinct to take responsibility for the family dynamics that had contributed to our situation. It suggested a level of self-awareness and maturity that would serve her well in the challenging months ahead. What will you tell them? Sarah considered this carefully, The truth, that their successful daughter has been acting like a condescending idiot to their son who was quietly building an empire. That I need to apologize not just to you, but to them for making them complicit in underestimating you. You don't need to take all the blame, Sarah. Family dynamics are complex, and everyone contributed to the patterns we fell into. Maybe, but I was the loudest voice promoting those patterns. Remember last Christmas when I suggested you might want to take business classes at the community college? In front of the entire extended family? I did remember. Sarah had delivered the suggestion with the kind of helpful concern that made it impossible to object without seeming ungrateful, while simultaneously reinforcing everyone's assumptions about my limited capabilities. That was particularly effective, I acknowledged with a slight smile. It was horrible, Sarah said, shaking her head. And there were dozens of moments like that over the years. Death by 1,000 cuts of casual dismissal. Her awareness of the cumulative impact surprised me. Sarah had always been emotionally intelligent, but I hadn't expected her to analyze the mechanics of condescension so precisely. The important thing is moving forward, I said. The past shaped us, but it doesn't have to define us. Speaking of moving forward, Sarah said, shifting into a more businesslike tone, I have some questions about the Morrison Industries account. If I'm taking it over Monday, I need to understand what challenges I'm walking into. Her transition to professional concerns was smooth and natural, suggesting she was already beginning to separate our family relationship from our working relationship. Morrison is more complicated than your promotion announcement indicated, I said. They've been expressing concerns about service quality for the past 18 months. The previous account manager left partly because of tension with their leadership team. Sarah's expression sharpened. What kind of concerns? Response time, creative consistency, strategic alignment with their growth objectives. They're a construction company expanding into sustainable building practices, but Pinnacle's campaigns have focused on traditional industry messaging. That's fixable, Sarah said immediately. Sustainable construction is huge right now. Green building certifications, energy efficiency standards, environmental impact messaging. There's tremendous opportunity there. I was impressed by her quick strategic thinking and her instinct to see opportunity rather than just problems. This was exactly the kind of analytical approach that would be essential for the expanded role I was offering her. There's more, I continued. Morrison represents 30% of Pinnacle's revenue, but their profit margins are below industry standards because of the service issues. They're essentially subsidizing inefficient operations. Ouch, Sarah said. So fixing the relationship isn't just about client satisfaction, it's about operational viability. Exactly. And Morrison's contract comes up for renewal in 6 months. If we lose them due to unresolved service issues, Pinnacle's financial model becomes unsustainable. Sarah leaned forward, her competitive instincts fully engaged. What's my budget for fixing this? Team resources, external consultants, technology upgrades? Whatever you need within reason, I said. But I want a detailed strategic plan within 2 weeks, implementation timeline within a month, and measurable results within 90 days. Those are aggressive timelines, Sarah observed. Morrison Industries is an aggressive client with aggressive growth goals. They need a marketing partner who can match their energy and vision. If that's not Pinnacle, they'll find someone else. Sarah nodded slowly, clearly processing the complexity of the challenge I'd just outlined. And if I succeed? If I turn around the Morrison relationship and improve their profitability? Then you prove you can handle strategic turnarounds under pressure. That opens doors to much larger opportunities within Sullivan Enterprises. Such as, I pulled out my phone and opened the organizational chart for my entire business empire, something Sarah had never seen before. The network of subsidiaries, joint ventures, and strategic partnerships stretched across multiple industries and geographical regions. Sullivan Enterprises owns 12 marketing and advertising agencies across 4 states, I explained, showing her the chart. 7 facility management companies, 4 commercial real estate development firms, 2 construction companies, and 3 technology consulting practices. Sarah studied the chart with growing amazement. This is massive, Jake. You're not just successful, you're running a conglomerate. 47 companies employing over 850 people, I confirmed. Annual revenues last year exceeded $150 million, with projected growth to $200 million within 2 years. And you built all this while I thought you were barely scraping by as a maintenance worker. I built it because I had the freedom to focus entirely on business growth without family expectations, social pressures, or external limitations on my vision. Sarah set down my phone and looked directly at me. Where do I fit in all this? What's the long-term opportunity you're talking about? This was the conversation I'd been anticipating and preparing for since deciding to acquire Pinnacle. Sarah's question revealed that she was already thinking beyond immediate challenges to strategic career planning. Regional Marketing Director for the Pacific Northwest, I said. Oversight responsibility for all marketing subsidiaries from Seattle to San Francisco. Budget authority in the mid-7 figures, staff of over 200 people across multiple agencies. Sarah's eyes widened. That would be a bigger role than anything I ever imagined. But it requires proving you can operate at that level. Success with Morrison Industries is the first test. After that, we'd gradually expand your responsibilities to include oversight of our other agencies, integration of best practices across companies, and development of new service offerings. And if I fail, then you continue in your current role, at Pinnacle, with the understanding that you've reached your ceiling within Sullivan Enterprises, I said honestly. No shame in that. Most people never get the opportunity to test their limits at this level. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the magnitude of both the opportunity and the risk I'd outlined. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new quality of determination I'd never heard before. I want to try, she said. Not because you're my brother, not because I feel guilty about how I treated you, but because this is the kind of challenge I've been preparing for my entire career without realizing it. It won't be easy, I warned. The transition period will be particularly difficult. Learning new systems, adapting to different performance metrics, managing large teams with higher stakes. I understand, Sarah said. But I also understand that this opportunity exists because you've built something extraordinary. I want to be part of that, and I want to contribute to its continued growth. Her response convinced me that she was approaching this decision strategically rather than emotionally. That was essential for success at the level of responsibility I was describing. Then we start Monday with Morrison Industries, I said. Catherine will have all the background files, performance data, and resource allocation information ready for you by 8 a.m. What about the rest of the team? How do they feel about working under new ownership, and specifically about my expanded role? It was a perceptive question that showed Sarah was thinking systematically about change management and team dynamics. Mixed reactions, I said honestly. Rebecca is cautiously optimistic. She sees opportunities for creative expansion. David is pragmatic. He understands that change was inevitable and appreciates the investment in new technology. Amanda is nervous but excited about potential career growth. And concerns? Questions about whether family relationships will affect professional decisions. Uncertainty about performance standards under new ownership. Natural anxiety about job security during transition periods. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. How do we address those concerns while maintaining team cohesion? Transparency, consistency, and demonstrated competence, I said. Your success with Morrison Industries will send a clear message about merit-based advancement. Your professionalism in handling our changed family dynamic will reassure people about fairness and objectivity. As evening settled over Portland, Our conversation gradually shifted from strategic planning to personal reflection. For the first time in years, Sarah and I were talking honestly about our ambitions, our fears, and our hopes for the future. "I keep thinking about all the time we wasted," Sarah said as we prepared to leave. "Years of maintaining artificial distance when we could have been building something together." "We weren't ready before," I said. "I needed to prove myself independently, and you needed to discover that success isn't always visible or conventional." "You think we can make this work? The family and business relationship?" "I think we can build something new that honors both," I said. "But it will require ongoing effort, clear communication, and mutual respect for each other's strengths and limitations." As we walked toward the elevator together, I realized that the most important acquisition I'd made wasn't Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. It was the opportunity to rebuild my relationship with Sarah on a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and shared professional goals. The elevator doors closed on two siblings who had spent 32 years misunderstanding each other's potential. When they opened again, we would begin the challenging but promising work of discovering what we could accomplish together. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.